Welcome to the Teacher's Toolkit for Literacy, the free podcast for motivated teachers and school leaders who want to inspire their students and school community in literacy learning. Make sure you subscribe to the show on your favourite podcast player, and for more amazing literacy resources, check out the show notes provided with every episode.
Hi, I'm Sharon, and I'm the host of A Teacher's Toolkit for Literacy. In every Toolkit episode, we bring you specific resources, tools, strategies, tips, techniques to help you in your job as a teacher of literacy. Firstly, we acknowledge and pay our respects to the Kaurna people, the traditional custodians whose ancestral lands we gather on. We acknowledge the deep feelings of attachment and relationship of the Kaurna people to country, and we respect and value their past, present, and ongoing connection to the land and cultural beliefs.
Welcome to the podcast, and in every Toolkit episode we bring you specific resources, tools, strategies, tips, techniques to help you in your job as a teacher of literacy. And it's about helping you as a professional, making some great choices for the betterment of your students. We hope it opens some doors for you, don't we, Sharon?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's also about bringing out the fullness of the Australian curriculum in all its glory. Yes?
Yes.
Yes.
So I feel like you've got to prompt me every now and then. Wake up, Sharon, wake up.
Well, you're just warming up, I think.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
It's been a long day.
It's been a long day. I just thought I'd talk about professional learning today and how important that's been in our lives, and maybe a professional learning incident or event that really sticks out in your mind, Sharon, whether it was an association, whether it was a resource, whether it was a person that you read about or read their books or...
Oh, well, I can probably combine all those three in one. So definitely for me, what used to be the Australian Reading Association, that's now the Australian Literacy Educators Association, and its international affiliate, the International Literacy Association, have been big drivers for me in being able to access professional learning both through their publications and through conferences that have allowed me to sit with those who I can learn from and not only listen but engage in conversation with those people. And, of course, with those who are at the conferences as well. So for me, those associations have been really important pieces for me in being able to, I guess, ask and inquire about my own learning.
And I think something that was really quite big for us was and it shows how teaching is so transportable. We actually went over to New York to work over there and found some great professional learning in that.
Yes, in colleagues and with the people we worked with and with, yes.
In fact, today we have a very special guest who actually was over in New York with us for a time.
That's my cue, it sounds like, yeah. I'm tempted to say, hello, it's Michelle, but it's Mike here, Mike Dumbleton.
Yes, we'd like to introduce Mike Dumbleton, a South Australian author, who's written many books, and Mike, you were with us over there.
Yeah, that's right.
It's in the education system, and
it was a great experience. And one of the books that I'm going to talk about, first of all, is called Cat, and I think that's known to a lot of people. It was an honour book in 2008, I think it was, and it came out. I wasn't here when there was a lot of promotion going on, obviously, so I had to wait to see it. There was an American version edition in Barnes & Noble. I think I went down to Union Square to see it on the tables there. So that was really exciting, and it had a dust cover on and things like that, and a couple of small changes, but nothing in the text or the illustrations, just all to do with the presentation. So
you had a twin purpose of being in New York. You were a consultant there in their school system, like we were, and then you were also you continued writing books all that time? Or?
Yeah, that's right. Although I used to refer to myself as a teacher who does some writing. And I suppose in New York I was a consultant who does some writing. So, and the teacher bit always came first, to be honest, because whereas the writing can sort of go on the back burner. Parent meetings, assessments, all those kinds of things that punctuate the calendar for the year in schools, you can't just put to one side. So it was a matter of finding time. And often I used to get up a bit early in the morning to give myself half an hour, 3/4 of an hour, jotting some notes down, writing something. I worked on the basis that would be 2.5 hours a week. If I didn't, I might be able to catch up at the weekend, which wasn't always true, but you just had to have some kind of routine to be able to do that. So that was good.
And have you always wanted to write from going way back? Or?
Yeah, I did. I was interested in writing. I lived in London at one stage and wrote to some newspapers there suggesting they needed a column from a youngster, as I was at the time. And
how old were you?
Early 20s, and I didn't get a reply. So that sort of did that. And then my wife and I started travelling, and that took up time. And then we started a family. We had one child the first time, twins the second. And after that, there was no time to do anything except bring up the family. So it says on a few of the blogs you'll find around the place, once my kids became teenagers and didn't want me there all the time. So when you took them to soccer or tennis or whatever it was, you could sort of let them go. I could sit in the car, do a bit of work, and then I'd always turn out to make sure I saw their games and things like that. And I started doing some writing then.
And you were teaching? Or?
Yeah, full-time teaching at the same time. But I sort of always had something with me in the car so that if I broke down and was waiting for the RAA, I'd be able to do some work. So I found I could use any time, any spare time to work straight away. And I think that applies to shorter text, such as picture books. You can do that. You can get your head back into it. Whereas I did write a young adolescent novel at one stage, and that was very, very difficult. You just trying to get your head back into X number of words. You can just lose touch with it because of all those school imperatives, and you go back to it and you have to reread it again to find out what's happening, and it's quite a long read.
So you were growing as a writer over that time, and you were growing as a teacher, and then eventually we caught up with you in New York, and then you came back here, and then you've gone on to more writing and more books. And
I've had a little bit more time to do the writing, and that never guarantees that books get published necessarily. It depends. You need to find someone who wants to publish that particular story. And with children's books, it can be a case that you send something away, but you don't know they've already done a book that's similar. So say, for instance, if you did one on pirates, actually I did something like that in the US, and then I looked at the publisher's site and they just released one, and I thought, they're not going to want my manuscript now because it's two similar sort of themes at the same time. Yes. And also I had a book that was shortlisted called Passing On a while ago, and the question there is, it was to do with people dying, bereavement, and publishers will not carry a large number of books about that, whereas about dogs or cats they may carry a few more. There's a limit to the number of books they're going to carry on bereavement on their list, so you have to look around and see who's got what and things like that.
So with today, I thought we could go through some of your books, which would be fantastic for the teachers out there, because they can hear what the background behind these books is, and when they read them with their kids, they'll just know so much more about them. Right. And we've talked a lot about read alouds on this show, and also kids innovating on books to do their own versions in their writing. So we'll just see how it all goes. And
all right, that's fine. Yep.
Yes. And we're looking forward to your insights, because when you've got the author sitting here,
that's right,
to talk about books, I think it's important that there's that other layer of voice that can come. Yeah,
that's right. And you find that when people talk about the author's purpose and so on, that varies. It might be me, the same author, but sometimes the first book, Cat, I'll talk about in a second, there was some experimentation there to actually find what would work as a narrative. And other books are written by intention because you want to write about refugees or the war or something like that. So it varies. So with Cat, I was asked by someone if I could do something for very young readers, and amongst a range of things that I tried, because you mustn't think that authors simply start writing and then the book comes out. I would have tried 4 or 5 different ideas. So it's like the drafting and proofing, and then thinking this one looks as though it may work. I'm not sure about that one. And so you keep all those notes together, and sometimes you may come back to an idea. But at that particular time, the one that sort of took my interest was the cat idea. And it was a very simple idea of just inverting or reversing words. So when it starts off, it says cat, dog, dog, cat. Now, just that inversion, if you say cat first and then dog, the implication is the cat has seen the dog. That's not a big problem because the cat will just go the other way and move away from the dog. But if you then say dog, cat, it's all on, basically. Yeah. You know the chase is going to ensue. So it ended up being the next one. I'm going to have to check myself here. It ended up being the mouse. So it ended up being cat, mouse. And you know straight away there's going to be a chase. Mouse, cat. And the mouse is taking off like crazy. So the thing that you don't always realize, and I didn't write it with this in mind, but there's a lot of inferring happens on the previous page as to what the reversal of words. So you say it one way, then you say the next, say the 2 words again, the other way round, and you can ask the kids, what do you think's going to happen now? And they will get it. So with the cat dog, it says dog, cat, tall tree. When you turn the page, thank goodness for that. And there's that sense of relief. Cat, mouse, mouse, cat, small hole. Thank goodness for that. And Craig Smith has done a wonderful job with the illustration, so you can just see the mouse's eye looking out of a small mouse hole, and the cat's far too big to get in there, so they're safe. And then there's another one, cat, sprinkler. Sprinkler, cat, high fence. Thank goodness for that. Now, you'll be able to find the book and have a look at it and see the other things that happen in the process of the book, but that happens now. As an author, when I get to do this with students, the thing I cannot stop the students doing when they're listening is reading. Because with so few words, it's a sparse text. I think there might be something like 63 words in the whole book with repetitions of phrases. But they just want to read. They look at it. So I let them read it with me. I say, well, if you can read it with me. And they just delight in it. And sometimes you can move away completely and turn the pages and they read it. And I put it up on the screen. There's a big book version as well and so on. So really it shows that business of the students have achieved something. They can recognize some of the words and they want to do it with you. And then on the last phrase where it says, thank goodness for that, and that's repeated all the way through, I practice with them saying, well, on the last one, when we finish a book, when we get to the end, and the last little thing was cat, mat. Mat, cat. Safe and warm. Thank goodness for that. And I say to the kids, when we say the last time, because it's the end of a book, so that people can hear it in your voice, we just slow it down a little bit and say it a little bit more quietly, and the audience will know, whoever you're reading it to, will know that this is the end of the book. So we practice it and they do their hushed, thank goodness for that at the end. So it's a really fun book to do with kids that they enjoy doing and recognizing. So if you find a copy, have a go at that.
Oh, yes. And, you know, I have used that book with students. It is absolutely embedded on my mind, the faces of students as that once they know what's going on here, when they've worked it out, there's just, and it's not we want to race ahead with it, it's just that savouring of what's going to come next. So, no, wonderful, very few words, but the power.
Yes, yeah.
The power.
So there's a lot of thinking going on in the kids' heads, isn't there? That's not just the words, there's the illustrations, everything about the whole book.
Yes,
That's getting them thinking about, what if this happens, or what.
Well,
as you said, there was inferring going on on a big scale.
Well, with the teaching background, I do the usual thing of talking about cats beforehand and who's got a cat and what happens if a cat sees a dog. What happens if a cat sees a mouse? And they'll give you all these answers, so they're already primed for some of those things.
Yeah.
And there are some things that aren't in the words, because there was a bike in the story, and the cat is distracted. He's looking at some fish. There's no mention of that. It's just in the pictures. But I'll say to them, why didn't the cat notice that this child on a bike was coming towards him? And then they'll point out that he likes fish, and he thought he'd perhaps got a meal there. And that was enough to sort of take his attention away.
I could see young ones writing their own versions with maybe a different ending, or, a different beginning, or,
yes.
Yeah.
That's
different pairings of
animals.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, that's right. You could take it to the jungle, couldn't you, or something like that?
Yes.
So there are lots of opportunities to do things,
Yeah.
and it assures them that you can get a narrative without having to write lots and lots and lots necessarily. So it's not a daunting.
No, it's one word on each page.
Yeah,
we must. We'll put the books up on our podcast notes, or on our blog or whatever, so that people have links to them. Definitely on the Facebook group. So,
yes. Yeah. So, Cat, where in the scheme of things did Cat come into the book? In what order did Cat appear?
In the books that I've produced,
yes.
I think my first book came out in 1992, so that gives a bit of a date. And the Cat came out in 2007, I think, so it was on the CBC list.
Yes.
2008. Yeah. There was actually a play of Cat which was put on here, which I missed for a long time, and then my wife and I drove up to Port Pirie to see it up there, because we were in, like I say, we were in the States at the time. All the interest in Cat was at its peak.
Yes, actually, that was another thing I was going to say about that story of Cat. Is a great one to dramatise.
Yeah.
It's very easy for kids to, as that's being read,
actions,
to enact it.
And put music to it, And the next book, Mike?
Well, the next one I've got here goes up in terms of the age range. This one's called Digger, and it came out a couple of years ago, or 3 now, we're into 2021. And it's a very different book. It's with it being Digger, you can tell that it's about the soldiers. It relates to the First World War. And I have a personal connection with this, in as much as we have lifelong friends in France, and they have a small cottage in Normandy. So we end up where they live, north of Lille. You can actually cycle or even walk to Fromelles, where 5,000 Australian soldiers lost their lives in a very short time in an almost futile battle over a small section of land. And there's a cemetery there and so on. So you feel the immensity of all these Australian youngsters, and they were youngsters who died there. And at the time, it wasn't possible to repatriate people and bury them here in the same way that they had graves on foreign shores, if they had a grave. And the war was such that you couldn't necessarily identify people. Parents here were greatly distressed. It's one of the reasons why in Australia you see so many monuments, because they're monuments to the children that died in absentia, basically, and just giving them a monument somewhere. And there were a few parents who thought that if they went over there after the war, they'd be able to find where their son died and make sure there was a cross there and a burial point and somewhere to remember. And they realised when they got over there that this was just an absolute quagmire. The war was fought over a small parcel of a small area of land, moving backwards and forwards. It was an extremely long front where the war took place, but people moved backwards and forwards. So you can see markers there that show the front for the Allies in June 16, and then you can find the front for the Allies in September 16, and that could have gone back, and then it moves forward again. And it's just a lot of people dying in that area of land. So you sort of need to know that. And with this book, it's one of the books where I can't just talk about the cover and then move on. I have to I show some slides and things like that to make sure the kids are aware of what trenches are, because if you say digger and then you say trench, you've suddenly got a machine digging up the road, digging a trench, obviously, but this is not what it was in the First World War. It has a very different meaning. So I make sure all the kids understand the context, and we talk a little bit about it and show them some slides. And then some of the nicer things, in as much as often the trenches were named after places in Adelaide or streets that they knew. So when they were going around in these muddy holes that were often filled with water and very, very cold, they felt as though they just had some kind of remembrance of home and so on. And Digger itself is a small soft toy kangaroo, which a young girl gave to her brother. And if I just read you the start of it, it says, Digger wasn't always Digger. For a while, he was just Annie's small kangaroo, made of scrap material. But when her brother James went to war, Annie stitched the name Digger onto her kangaroo and gave him to James as a farewell present. A digger for a digger, she said, hugging her brother. I'll keep him safe, James promised, as he tucked the kangaroo into his top pocket. James and Digger boarded the ship together and waved to the crowd together. And then off goes Digger, but you're seeing it through the eyes of the kangaroo in a lot of ways. So it just softens quite a confronting story so that younger audiences can read it. And once again, if you get hold of the book, you'll be able to see what happens and see the connections that exist between Australia and France even today. So when I went to France, which I've done quite a bit until COVID, we went to a school at Villers-Bretonneux, which is where the Australian War cemetery is. And that school has a banner inside that says, "Never forget Australia," because they're conscious of what Australian soldiers did for them. My wife and I went to the school, and my French is so-so. I can speak French, but it's not the best. My wife is pretty fluent, and we got friends over there, and we did a French translation, so we could read that to the students as well at the same time, just alternating. My French friend did the French, I read the English, and she read a bit, I read a bit, and then we moved on and so on. And the kids were just engaged in the story. They knew a lot of the stories. They do some research each year about individual Australian soldiers. And one of the touching things, because it came from a photo I saw of some French girls tending Australian graves, just making sure that the weeds were off them and they'd got some flowers there and so on in 1919, because they were aware the parents couldn't do it, there wasn't anyone else, and it was before the War Graves organisation was set up. So I looked at that photo and thought, well, I wanted to sort of make that part of the story, so that Digger is found by a French girl, and she becomes a part of the story in looking after James, his grave. So, serious story, a sad story, but I think a story that people need to know. And in terms of the connection, I can remember reading the story to the kids in the class in France, and then remember, these are all French kids, they sang Waltzing Matilda to us in English. Wow. It's really good. So just a strong connection there, a serious subject, but in a way that's accessible for younger kids.
It is an amazing village to visit, Sharon. We went there, didn't we?
Yes.
It's just so moving.
Went to the school. Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. It is a wonderful connection. So that's a story that has been with you for a long time.
Yes, it's one of those things where I thought I just want to sort of explore this a little bit. I had the idea of wanting to write something, because all those emotions when you go around the war grave cemeteries, it's just very emotional. And we were there at one stage when our kids who've grown up now were in their late teens or early 20s, and those are the kids that died there. So you're looking at endless thousands of graves there. And they're from young kids, as I say. So, if I'd have been born and we'd had our kids at a different time, we could have lost all of them. And some parents did, and parents from South Australia did. All the villages you'll see around where there are memorials, and down close to Unley, where I live, you've got the names on the memorials and stuff like that. Just so many kids lost their lives there.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's a story that, and lots of people came up to me saying their uncle, their grandfather, their great-grandfather, they've got mementos from the war and medals and things like that. So they do connect to a lot of those stories very directly.
Yes, and timely that there is still, as we, as generations we lose some of that story. I think it's important for this awareness raising.
Yep.
That's continued, that we bring to students in an accessible way, so that they understand not only the heritage of what's happened for and between countries, but what that means.
Yeah, and I think it represents a platform, because there are obviously other books, and there are longer books, and there are books with fewer illustrations that people can move on to. But this sort of makes it very immediate. You can see them in the trenches. You can find out more about some of those details later if you want. And some of the illustrations actually have Via Bretonneux in mind. There's some, you've been there, you've seen some postcards of how it was just after the war with the spire of the church, or just sort of slightly demolished and so on. So some of those have been used as the basis for the illustrations. Robin Coucher, who did the illustrations, he did a wonderful job on researching those, so it's quite authentic. And the book's on sale at the War Memorial over there, and it's on the War Memorial here as well. It's on sale as well, because it just focuses.
A great springboard for a unit of study in this area with a class, and also maybe any part of the unit that you're doing. You could do it at the beginning or the middle or the end, or
Well, we actually had some small kangaroos made up looking exactly like the one on the cover, and left one of those at the school there as well. That was part of a gift to them. So other people who go there and go into the class will see those things. And this is nothing to do with the books, but also they know about Australian rules football. So you see some, it's quite strange to sort of see Aussie rules footballs over there, and the flags of various teams and things like that, because they spend a lot of time finding out about what Australia is like because of this sense of connection. And they actually sent some money to the bushfire schools in Victoria. We raised some money for that, didn't we, in New York when we were there?
Yes.
Yep.
But they sent a gift that's sort of saying, well, you sent money to help us rebuild our schools and things like that. Nearly 100 years ago, and 100 years later, they're making some collections to help with that. So it's a wonderful connection.
Yep.
Okay,
All right.
so from Digger, and thanks for sharing the richness of, from the writer and illustrator, the thought, just touching on the thought processes, that are involved in that and the research. Thanks, Phil. Thanks, Mike. Okay, now we've had Digger the kangaroo, now Jump and Shout.
Jump and Shout, yeah. Well, people of my age will think of Twist and Shout as well, as a thing. But this is Jump and Shout, and it's simply a sort of looking at lots of words to do with movement and things that you can do, but just weaving it into a narrative. So there's a narrative thread that gives you a sort of a storyline of kids going out for the day, doing various things, and then ending up back at home. And once again, it's a book where, if I just read the start of it, it says... Now here with Peter Canavis he's done lots of illustrations, and he did some wonderful illustrations for this. So, clap, cheer, we're going out. Walk, run, jump and shout. Climb, reach, monkey bars. sit, swing, towards the stars. Now, it keeps going like this, but I found out very early on that you could actually coach people in what was coming up of any age, and you'd say, okay, I want you to do these things, clap. And when they clap, they'll end up going, you get these claps all over the place. I say, no, just one clap. When I say clap, all clap, and they do it together. And then jump and shout. And often I'm talking to kids who are sitting down. I actually don't want them jumping around and going absolutely ballistic. So I tell them to remain on their backsides, but just move up and down a bit and wave their hands and things like that. And they can cheer from those positions. So I get them to do the actions. And they love it. And we go through the whole book with them doing the actions and some of the sounds that turn up later on. And there's a section where it says something, time to eat, and then it says slurp. And we practice, so slurp, as though it's, and you get all the kids going, sorry, this will sound disgusting with the microphone. And that's what I tell the kids. That sounds disgusting, but it's very good. And so they do slurp and they do chew and these are the clips that you play back, aren't they? When so, but they really enjoy it and they do all the actions. Well, someone I used to teach with a long time ago sent me a video and said, "Oh, hi, Mike, we've got jump and shout. Just had to send you this video," and it was of a young child acting out everything, but his sister, I think it was reading the book. So she was reading the books like clap, cheer, we're going out, etc., etc. And the little boy's standing there and he claps and he cheers and he runs across the room and walks and does all the actions of falling and rolling and slurping and chewing and things like that, and did the whole book, just enacted the whole thing. So we had someone who could obviously read the book and is reading it to him, and he's acting everything out, and you can do that kind of thing. Now, at the other end of the spectrum, I'm an ambassador for the Premier's Reading Challenge and for Raising Literacy Australia. And when they were packing some books for Raising Literacy Australia, one time the Premier's Department came down to help pack books to see what was going on because there was some government funding involved and so on. And they asked me if I could come down and speak to them about, the importance of reading and the benefits of having the funding and things like that. But I said, shall I get them to do jump and shout? And believe me, they all did it and they loved it. From the clapping, even the chewing and the slurping. I think it's just, I think it was probably a high point in the day, to be honest. It appeals to the child in everybody.
Yes. And
they end up, at the end of it, the kids come down a bit, they end up sleeping and they end up snoring. But my, you get some snores out of that. So once again, it's a fun book, and I don't know that I anticipated all the fun that I would have with it. You could just feel it in the words, yes. But when you get to read your book to an audience, and with a picture book, it's essential. I have to, at several points, stop, and I make myself stand up so I'm really reading properly, and read out loud. So I go somewhere where I can't be heard and just look strange. And read it through so I know the words are working okay. I can get my tongue around the words because I haven't put two together that cause a problem, and so on. And at least one of the publishers I have, we do a virtual read-through where I read it and they listen in, before the book moves on for publication and things like that. So
it's high engagement because they're all involved in it, aren't they? And it seems to be any age group can have fun with it, like very little ones.
Yeah.
Sounds to me that's the kind of book that we could say we can really live the book.
Yeah. You can do the whole story from start to finish. Yeah. It's it doesn't age is immaterial.
Yeah. Oh, such fun.
And I think kids could write their own versions.
There are. Yes, they may. Well, and response
with different actions.
Response in that is certainly, engaging in it, and maybe other. Well, certainly that lovely exploration of words just by introducing words like slurp.
Yeah, that's right.
That's language should be fun.
Yeah.
So having the fun with it and really being able to use it to describe the things that we do.
Yep.
Any day.
Playing with language.
Beautiful, yes.
From my point of view, because they're so busy doing the actions and listening to roll and Snuggle, cuddle, read, play. There's a whole range of things they're doing. I think it's a bit like Cat with so few words that if I just put it on the screen, they'd start reading it with me.
Yes.
But they're so busy acting it out that I get to read it.
It's drama too, isn't it? Drama and literacy.
Full on.
Yeah.
Yes. Yep. It's living it. It's alive.
Yeah.
Without a doubt.
And your next book, Mike?
Well, the next one is that's change again, and I find that I like doing different things. It's so occasionally I get to choose to do something else, and then sometimes I get asked to do something else. And this book, I was actually asked if I would write it by the publishers. It's a non-fiction book a picture book on Meet Douglas Mawson. And it's in the Meet series, and people are probably aware of that. There are lots of Meet Banjo Patterson, Meet the Anzac, Meet Mary McKillop, Meet Don Bradman, Australian iconic characters or groups of people and so on. And I was asked to do the Mawson one. And this is where the connection with working full-time comes in, because I was asked once, and I actually said I couldn't do it. I was just too busy with things, and that's not one of those things that authors often say if they want to be published. But I know when I'm too busy to do something, and you just have to let it go, because that wasn't my first sort of responsibility. But luckily, they asked me again, and at that time I did have some time. Sorry, just let me through. And then I did the book. And I'm just so pleased that I got the chance to do it, because obviously Mawson is South Australian.
Yes.
Yep.
I ended up coming up living in a house where someone next door had met Mawson's wife as a youngster. He was in his late 90s, and he worked at a garage where he'd been sent out when someone of importance came through in a car. In the times when they checked the tyres, put the water in, did all those things. And Mrs. Mawson was going from Adelaide to Brighton, I think it is, where they lived, and he had to go out and make sure that she was okay, and did she want a cup of tea and all those kinds of things. So it's a very close connection, and we have the Mawson display in the museum as well, where you can see the huts and the sleds and so on. So it was really good that I got to do it. The illustrator of this one was Snip Green, and the illustrations are very striking. They're sort of cold and glacial shapes and forms. There's a very graphic element to it, and the colours, the blues, and lots of things in it. There's a picture where there's Mawson walking up a huge sort of hill by himself. He's looking like an ant figure almost, but it shows the vastness of the landscape and how you'd feel if you were stuck there on your own. And kids are really interested. They know quite a lot about it because there are Mawson Crescents, there's Mawson Lakes, there are references to it, particularly around Adelaide. And then I had to do a lot of research on it. And you're conscious you've got to get things right and triangulate your information and make sure that you've said the right thing, because there's a society called the Friends of Mawson. And I think there are lots of them, and I think they would defend Mawson's history and the accuracy quite well. And then often I ask students, how many words do you think there are in the book? And sometimes they get close. There's actually 623 words in the book. I've counted, or I got the computer to do it. And Mawson wrote a book himself, Home of the Blizzard it's called, and there must be 100,000 plus words in it. So I say to them, what have I had to do to actually write about Mawson in a picture book? And we get to the summarising, choosing the most important bits and so on, and just magnifying a part of the Mawson story, not the whole thing. So that immediately takes you to critical literacy, because you can see what's been included, what's been left out, and there are some things that as a picture book writer I decided to put in the book, and some things I didn't put in the book, and things that you can find out about Mawson. So I won't go through the whole trip, but basically they left from Hobart and they went down to Commonwealth Bay, and they went on what was called an Eastern expedition, and 3 people left and only Mawson came back. And when Mawson came back, just to give you an example of the critical literacy aspect, it says that he left the huts, and right at the end, it says, imagine Mawson's joy when he finally saw the base camp in the distance. So Mawson survived, he gets back to the base camp. Imagine his despair when he saw that the Aurora, that's the boat they'd sailed in on, had left without him. And then it says that a fair amount of time passed before he could get away from there. It doesn't say exactly why the boat left. I didn't want a long explanation of that, but we work it out with the students. I said, why would the boat... They don't want to leave Mawson stranded there. They did leave some men there in the huts. There was some food and provisions, but why did the boat have to leave? And because of what they'd read previously and the mention of pack ice and the seasons, you can work out that if the boat didn't go, it could get frozen there, and then they wouldn't be able to get supplies and things like that.
Right.
Everyone would be stranded.
Yeah.
But because you can't get everything in there, you don't want pages with convoluted explanations that take up too much time. So there are things that you can include in there. You could get people to do some research, children to do some more research on Mawson, and you come up with things that, oh, Mike didn't put that in the book. Well, why do you think that was? Well, some of it is you simply can't get it all, and so you've got to be selective. But there are other reasons sometimes where you decide, well, perhaps it's to do with the age of the audience, that he didn't mention that, and so on. Yeah. And then with all of the books, there's a table at the end that gives a timeline of Mawson's life or a timeline of Bradman's life and so on, and gives you more detail on a couple of pages in small print. So they're great starters for historical research.
Yes,
like that.
yes.
Brilliant.
And so really they're a non-fiction narrative.
Yes.
With, but yes, there's always that lovely information, extra information through the timeline, which is a nice feature for young writers too, working out how timelines work, and that it adds so much more that if we're reading that, we can also go back into the text to, see more of what's happening at what time.
That's
it's
right.
Really, really nice way to provide more connection and context for the whole story.
And there are little details where you have to, I sometimes, in my research, I gather photos to do some photo referencing and stuff, and then I send them to the illustrator for something like this. And because it's important that the illustrations are accurate as well. So one thing I wasn't aware of at the time, but became aware of, was that the tents, because of the ice, they don't have the guy ropes and the pegs because you can't knock them into the ice. It's just too hard. So they have some extra material at the base of the camp, base of the tent. They call a skirt that goes around it that you put things on. It may be ice, it may be rocks, it may be equipment you've got, maybe the sledge. But that keeps the tent down. Fixed. So if the illustrator had drawn a tent, but I'm sending photos of that to the illustrator so they get it right. They don't draw something as though it's in the West Beach holiday camp, ready for Christmas vacation.
So you enjoyed writing the book?
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Yeah. I enjoyed the research. I enjoyed the closeness to the subject. I enjoyed the fact that sometimes I go into schools and they've been to the exhibition and things like that.
Yeah.
Next book?
All right, we've got to treat everybody 2 books to go, and 2 different books again. So this is, just such a breadth of audience and experiences that you provide in your books. So, I don't think there's many children that are excluded from entering into the world of story through your writing, Mike. So
that's good. Yeah, it's useful when you go for school visits that you can talk to everyone from the youngest kids to the oldest kids and into junior secondary very often with someone. I mean, Digger and that works with, talking to them about those issues or how the book's put together. Just you can talk more and more about the background and how the book's written. So this next one is called Anissa's Alphabet, which is my most recent published book, and it's about a refugee child. Now, the word alphabet on the front is a little bit misleading because there are people who think, oh, it's an alphabet book. Well, Well, it is, but it's very much a mature alphabet book with a difference about a refugee. And in terms of the motivations for reading it, there's a dedication to Hussein at the start of the book. I can't remember his second name. I say that with some embarrassment, but it was. I've been teaching in classes where I've had students who are refugees, and then not that you sort of ask them a lot of questions, but over a period of time, you become conscious of the fact that they've seen some things that no child should rightly see at those ages, and it may be things happening to family members, and they've endured journeys and hardships that we wouldn't even contemplate. And I started writing this, and I gave myself, it's probably my hardest task because it rhymes, it follows the alphabet, and it has a narrative as well embedded in the story. So to give you an idea, with an alphabet book, A would be for apple and B might be for ball, but it's not that at all. A is for Anissa Al-Jiran. B is for bombs, when the fighting began. C is for carrying all that we can. Now, it continues through the alphabet, but on that C page, there are 12 little drawings of the parents and Anissa picking up things to take with them on the journey. And Anissa picks up some drawing things, some pencils, amongst all the other essentials of water and food and things that are being carried. There's a grandmother with them. She picks up some photographs and stuff like that. So you really have to read the visual text as well, because my written text is locked in to the letters of the alphabet, always starting in B, C. So you know it's going to go B, C, D. If you know your alphabet, you're in touch with this one. But it's quite a mature theme. I was really pleased because the book was shortlisted for some Western Australian Children's Awards, selected by the children themselves. And that quite heartened me, because I think sometimes it's a book that adults may buy for children, or teachers would buy to use with children and things like that. But to see children locking into it, that's great. And there are a few things in terms of the motivation. There was Hussein and his story, because I had A, B, and C, and D, and about 3 other letters sorted out, and those were going quite well. And I'd run through them with him and said, would that be okay? And I talked to him about the name to make sure you didn't inadvertently use a name which meant something else or wasn't suitable for, you know. And he came down and saw me in a couple of days later, or a week later, and said, "Oh, Mr. D, is that book been published yet?" And I said, I haven't finished writing it, Hussein, you know. It's going to get tricky because there's X, Y, Z at the end waiting for me. There's some problems there. But in the end, it did come together. It took a lot of time. It took a long time to write it, to smooth it off, to get better ideas for various things. And then the illustrator, Hannah Somerville, has done an absolutely brilliant job on the illustrations. And there are things where nothing is said in the text about a father or a grandmother, but they're both in the visual text. Yep. Because I can't just throw in another sentence when I'm rhyming things and I'm basically working off letter G. It just doesn't work like that. So it had to be in the pictures alone. And with this book, which doesn't have a Disney ending, dare I say that? It doesn't have a happy ever after ending, but it's not pessimistic. There's hope there. It's realistic, and when I read it to students, I'm conscious that they've absorbed the seriousness. And the other thing is, there are little phrases about refugees that concerned me, where refugees, sometimes I've heard them called queue jumpers and things like that. Well, essentially they're people, and a lot of them are kids. And so the cover, you can just see the back of several heads, but you can see Anissa's face. So there's a definite focus on a child that's here as an individual, as a living person. Yeah. And I think that resonates. Now, I do happen to know here that Hannah's daughter goes to a school where the teacher bought several copies of this. And one of the things she did with them, and they sent me a copy of one girl's work, was to ask the students to write the story in prose writing, so in long form, not in poems, which meant that they could see what I'd mentioned in the text, but they could pick up the things. They could say, well, they quickly raced around, and the father filled up some things with water, and Anissa let go her pet bird, and the grandmother, and none of these things are mentioned in the text, so they can read the pictures and write the story and put in more about the feelings and the boat that they left on and all those things. And they wrote some great things. It's sort of, the scaffold was in the book for people. Yeah. And it was just a matter of talking about it, working together to discuss it. What can we mention here? So that was wonderful to read that. And Anna, Anissa does some drawings on the way, because there were some places where we used children's drawings or her drawings to draw out a point. But if you read the book, you'll see how that's been used. But I thought it was a particularly used exercise for kids to do.
I was at a school a couple of years ago, and a number of children had been through those kind of experiences. It was high refugee population, and just beautiful children, and been through such harrowing times.
Yep.
And so Australia is such a great country to give them a chance to be here,
and good for them to be seen, represented in, not like you said, as in some ways when I read that story, it's this part in time. It began here, it ends there.
Yep.
It's an ongoing story.
Yeah, that's right. It's open ended.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I love that. That's how life is. That's so it's kind of catching a bit of a snapshot of this point, but it's not just a snapshot of it, but the enormity of life.
And the kids feel that.
Yes.
They look at the pictures, they get lost in the visuals, and they feel the immensity of it.
Yes.
And now you can actually say things like, I often say in school, well, just remember the bushfires. We had scenes where people were getting on boats where the land was in flames to get away. They were refugees, in their own country for different reasons. They weren't necessarily being shot at and so on, but it's it's very close.
Life and death, yeah.
And I love in this book, like you say, you've given this story a face and a name.
Yeah.
Because we meet this person. And so,
and it worried me that some people try and take away the face and the name, so they don't necessarily have to think about the issue. And they substitute phrases and terms that diminish people in this situation. So and if part proceeds go to the Australian Refugee Association. So that was one of those things where that's an important part of it as well. So.
Fantastic, Mark.
Yes. And
so we're on to the last one.
Not the last, may we say, of all of, but the last for today.
Well, this is a book that you'll be able to get a copy of. You can pre-order it now. I think it's going to come out in April, and it's coming out here and in the UK and the US, and it's already advertised. This is once again this is a humorous book. But I think even with the humorous books and serious ones, I don't write down to children. I write to children with an adult sense of humour, and I think some of the adults actually appreciate the books as well. There's no writing down to little people and whatever. It just doesn't do that. So this was a book about two dogs, one called Dandy, and he's the posh one, and one called Dazza.
Yes, my new Shazza's new best friend, Dazza.
Yeah, that's right. And Dazza is not the posh one. And to describe them and the things they do, I use what are probably called little nominalised phrases. So it says that...
everyone will be looking those up now, Mike. What are nominalised phrases?
Well, it's just a little noun term. So it says, Dandy and Dazza were different in so many ways. Dandy was a nominalised phrase, best in show sort of hound. So it doesn't say he was a winning dog or whatever. It turns it into the noun form, a best in show sort of hound. Dazza was a rough and tumble mongrel. And you can get the contrast completely there. And when you see them, Dandy's there with his awards, and Dazza's there with his mud and his flies, basically. And it carries on a bit like that. Dandy was a 5-star food sort of hound. And the illustrators there's a drink there called Woof Blanc. And there's a tin of dude food, things like that. And a little detail, he's got the fleur-de-lis, that sign that's a sort of posh sign of royalty. You can see on the end papers as well. Dazza was an old bone sort of mongrel, and he's found an old bone in a trash can. Dandy liked peace and quiet. He was a do not disturb sort of hound. Dazza was a woof, 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 go crazy sort of mongrel. And it continues where they meet a bit later on. And Dandy, if I remember, it was a sit and see sort of hound. And Dazza continued to be go crazy. He's chasing and snapping at everything. They develop a friendship. And Dandy eventually didn't realise that go crazy could be so much fun.
over to the Dazza side. Yeah. Yes.
So it goes on there. You can see what happens to those two dogs, but it's dedicated to a young girl called Eva, who we know lives in Melbourne actually. So she'll be coming out of lockdown soon. Yes. And but I did get the chance to read an advanced copy to her, and she loved it. And I got a message saying, they've had to read it 5 times, one after another. And she's pointing out the mud and the flies and all those on Dazza and things like that. So, and the illustrator, Brett Curzon, has done a wonderful job. I'm just so lucky to have a lot of different illustrators who have different styles, because some styles don't suit refugees or digger or whatever. So there are lots of different
I was going to say, each of the books you've shown, the illustrations are beautiful,
Yeah, they are.
They match the story beautifully, and that's just such an important part of it. And we call them tantalising texts, where the kids are really drawn to the books through the words and the illustration and everything about the book. It's just so exciting. And
well, when Eva was looking at the book, she was spotting things. So I'd have to pause and look at the so-and-so, and he's doing this and whatever. Once again, things not mentioned in the text, but details that the illustrators put in there that kids are drawn to. Yep. So look out for that one, Dandy and Dazza, and all the fun they have.
And you've got lots of other books too, Mike, but we just haven't got time today. But I think time to get on to our rapid-fire questions.
Yes, right, Phil.
That's right, yeah.
Ready to...
The clock is on.
The clock is on.
I know, it does feel like that.
What was your favourite book as a child?
I thought about, when I think about favourite books, I don't have one favourite. I used to read the series Famous Five, Enid Blyton. I used to devour one after another. And Biggles' books, W.E. Johns, used to read those. And there were several other series, but it was often the series. Yes. My best part was, I was living in England at that time as a youngster. I lived upstairs, and a street lamp was level with my window. So when my parents thought I was sleeping, I'd just open the curtains a bit and I'd read by the street lamp. That was great.
Perfect.
Cut down on your electricity bills.
Yeah, that's right. Cheap reading. Yeah.
Surely they had that put in for you.
I think series are really important for kids. They really give them a scaffold for the next. They know the next book's going to be a similar vein. It's style
and be as good as the one before.
And you found. Is that why you latched onto a series? Or
yeah, I think so. I identified with the kids some of the things that they'd done. Yeah. Flying planes with Biggles was a bit beyond me, but it was adventurous, and I sort of have a different view of those things these days. It'd be interesting to go back and have a look at those again. But Famous Five and some of those stories are still popular. I see them out in the shops and stuff. Yeah.
have you got a street light at this house that you can read by?
No, I'm allowed to stay up later now, funnily enough.
Are you? We'll check on that.
And you've got your own light.
That's right, yeah.
What's your most interesting school story?
Well, the most interesting school story is that I think with literacy, English that I've taught and so on, and writing and things like that, you have to make products from an early age. Simple books that may be sentence books that are stapled together, or just word books that follow a theme and so on. So the kids feel as though they've got something. My granddaughter Imogen brought a book home from Kindy the other day with drawings on and a couple of words put in it, but she just loves showing us the book. And I think English, I played a lot of sport myself. I love it, but you don't get recognition in the same way for things you do at school. So products are always an issue. And all the schools that I've been at, and even in New York, was at schools there, we got the kids making books. I have systems for doing that are quite easy to sort of run through without it being onerous for teachers. And this gets me to the story where I didn't actually see this, but I've had it happen in a similar way several times. But I was aware, but a teacher said to me, the kids had a personal achievement book that had to be handed in on a particular date. And if you didn't hand it in on a particular date, you lost marks. So it was, and you'd had warnings about this for 6 months, and you knew it was the system and so on. But the kids loved making the books anyhow, and they could change things in it. They had to have so many bits and pieces there. But there was a kid at the school who was suspended for offences that I won't go into in great detail.
Could be a good story.
Yeah, that's right. And she said, this teacher said, well, I saw him. I knew he'd been suspended. And once he'd been suspended, he should have been off the property. And then I saw him coming up the stairs, and I saw this head peeping around the corner. It's him. And I thought, well, I'll just sit here and watch, see what happens. And we had binding machines where the kids could bind their own books and put them together. So he looked around, and he crept out into the centre, and he had a couple of loose pieces of paper, and he had his PA book. And he went to the binder, and he's still looking around everywhere nervously, and he puts the holes in them and then opens it up and puts the work in, and then found his teacher's room and put the book in there. So he'd put the book, and then he went on to be suspended and left the premises. And I thought, you little ripper, yes. that is just wonderful. And it was the power. It wasn't as though you could even claim credit as an individual teacher. I mean, you can do that sometimes for getting kids to do things. There's no teacher around, but the system itself and the culture was strong enough for him to be invested even on a bad day before he went home. Yes. So,
that's wonderful, wonderful, and is a good reminder of how important it is that we actually get to create and make.
Yes, yeah.
These otherwise things just, where do they go? Where do all these thoughts that never got captured anywhere, or where's, it's just such wonderful recognition and confidence building and motivation and all of those things for us, that this is what good readers and good writers do.
Yep.
They make.
And you've got something to show for it. You've got something that's there. Yeah.
How do you think you learn to read?
Well, knowing and thinking are two different things. They're just in relation to that. But a combination of things. I do remember the Dick and Dora books I was given in school with predictable and repetitive text, and some of the reading patterns, and having to practice pages with my parents, then go back and read it to the teacher sometimes. But I remember having books in the house and going to the local library, which was a bit of a hut in those days, but you sort of went there and borrowed books and devoured them and so on. And really, reading was a key activity for adults. It was for my parents. Yeah. You'd see people around. If you got on a bus or a train or something like that, people were reading newspapers. Yeah. And one of my concerns at the minute is the amount of visual text and cues people get, and the fact that they don't do. It's not so visible. There are people who are pushing it, but it's not so visible around us. And I'm not sure that reading on the screens is the same as the sustained reading that you do with books and things like that. And also, I think the other part of that is, I think your reading is assisted by systematic writing as well. So you write, well, by systematic, I mean regular writing. And I remember having to write thank you letters for presents at Christmas. And I remember my own kids who wrote letters back to people in the UK when we were first here. But then you got tapes. You could record a tape and send it. But that's a bit of a trap because they don't do the writing and they lose that practice which everyone had before. So I think in an age of visual media and screens and that needs to be a priority. Certainly within school, so kids see it, and if possible in the home as well.
There's a bit of being passive, isn't it, when you're looking at a screen rather than taking action? Do you think?
Yeah, well, it's recognising rather than creating, isn't it? It's that business of someone reads to you, say, "Oh yes, I know that," and then if someone gives you a blank piece of paper and says, "Can you just jot down what they said?" Oh, this is different.
Yep.
So.
The best question you love to ask teachers?
Well, I have a range of questions depending on the teacher, probably.
Good answer.
So what went wrong there? Or I won't say anything if you don't. So, no, I said, I often say, what was it made you want to become a teacher? And the answer to that is often another teacher. It's often people had a teacher that they liked and thought, well, they're enjoying it. I like their lessons. And it didn't really matter what they taught. It was just that they thought there was something going on there.
Best question you love to ask students?
What do you think you'll be doing in 10 years' time? And if they look totally perplexed, I'll say, well, let's try 5 years.
Or tomorrow.
Or in 30 minutes. But I think it just gives a perspective on where their lives are going, and it lets me see whether or not they do have any plans or whether they're thinking beyond the moment. And I don't expect them to know, but kids will surprise you, and some you'll realise are absolute dreamers, and they're going to be all sorts of things, which may or may not turn out. But if you link their ambition to their current effort sometimes, changes are going to have to occur. But, it's just interesting to know. And then you've got a sort of conversation with them about what they're going to do. And I think teachers sometimes are in a position that parents aren't. It's that business of, we had 3 boys, and I reckon I could work with 30 kids in the class of someone else's kids sometimes easier than I could work with my own 3 boys when they were in a belligerent teenage mood or something like that, and Dad wasn't the authority that he used to be.
Definitely.
Just go on to your writing.
That's right. Yeah.
Best tip for thriving in teaching literacy?
Well, I think that comes out. There are lots of things, lots of threads for literacy, but the one I always come back to is making products, because I did write an educational book called Real Writing Across the Curriculum, and that was connected with my own sort of writing. When I had my first book out, I get a little bit of a thrill about seeing the name on the cover there and so on, and I was asked to do a biographical note. And within a year, I had gone back to school and talked things through with faculty, and we had the kids writing their PA books. But the first thing they'd do is a biographical note. So they'd write about themselves in the third person, which one of the kids said to me, because some of these things you sort of think, well, perhaps they can have the same kind of feeling about it. And one of the kids said to me, "Sir, if you write about it in the third person, if I say Dwayne was so-and-so, I can say good things about me, and it will sound as though someone else wrote it who agrees." Yes. And I said, I reckon you could work on that, and that was great. And they're not long. We specified that they were short. This wasn't a long piece of writing to impress with length and so on. It was just some things about things you'd done, things you were doing, things you wanted to do possibly, so you could scaffold it. And then with that PA book, they could select what they had in there. They had to have a minimum of so many pages, and they actually took us as a faculty across the curriculum, because we sort of thought about this in English. And some secondary schools people work together, some they're working together. But I remember a kid bailed me up. We got the PA book. He said, "Oh, Mr. D, can I put this in my PA book?" I said, "What is it?" He said, "It's from social studies." And I said, "Oh, what is it?" He said, "Well, it's an essay about some history stuff, but it was really good." I said, "When you say really good, what do you mean?" And I'm thinking in the back of my mind, I actually can't say no to this, but I sort of find it out a bit more. And he said, "Well, I got 9 out of 10 for it." And I said, "From?" And he named the teacher. That's pretty good. He doesn't give marks away, But all the time I said, and I'm thinking, I'd had the back page printed for about 300 PA books in advance, which said "from your best work in English."
Oh,
we had to get rid of all. We had to get rid of all of those, and it just went cross. The kids took it across curriculum, so they could bring it in from different subjects. Had to be prose writing, no filling in the gaps and all that kind of stuff, or pre-published sheets. So, but if it came from home ec, whatever, it didn't matter. If they thought it was good, right, and they could do something they thought was better and take it out. They could take a piece of work out and revise it and put it back in if they wanted. That's what I do as a writer. I have something, I take out, look at it again, make changes, and perhaps now it'll work.
And that's really honouring that writing process. Then, really allowing to move through the process rather than it just be and I did it and done
and it's finished forever.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for all your amazing insights today, Mike, and your contribution to our literacy community or literary community.
Well, to the world of the young, the world of older readers, because I think there is no doubt about what we take from any of those things, and as teachers, there cannot be anything more powerful for me as a teacher than having in my hands and bringing to children the crafting of the story and the ideas from the writer who's laboured.
And as you say, it's the crafting. No, it doesn't work first time. It takes a little while to work at this and getting feedback and stuff.
And you've put so much work into all these books, and that the students can all students out there can benefit from that. Modelling their own stories on those books.
And it's such a thrill as a teacher to bring those to children, to bring literature to them, to bring stories in ways that they haven't had a chance to think about yet. So really love your work, Mike.
Thank you for inviting me.
Love that you've endowed us with all of the stories behind the stories today, as well as the
my
stories.
Pleasure.
And great you live in South Australia too.
Yes.
I think all South Australians think that.
I think so.
Absolutely. And thank you everyone for joining us today on our podcast, and please keep in touch through our Facebook group or on our website. And we look forward to you joining us on our next podcast. And bye for now.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. To make sure you don't miss any literacy learning tips and insights, please subscribe to our show on your favourite podcast player. At Q Learning, our literacy specialists draw on over 30 years of teaching and international consulting experience to deliver world-class learning solutions. We equip, empower and support teachers to become their authentic selves. To find out about upcoming webinars and about how Q can help you and your school, visit qlearning.com.au. And you can get even more amazing teaching resources right now at teachific.com.au. Stay tuned.